Hello and many thanks for joining us on the program. I am Imonia Marere. On Tuesday, March 22nd, the World Bank published its 2022 Poverty Assessment Report on Nigeria. It detailed the totality of the World Bank's engagement on poverty and inequality, relevant data and analytics in Nigeria in the past 2 years, in collaboration, of course, with Nigeria's National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. The report pointed out slow growth, low human capital, labor market weaknesses, and exposure to shocks, amongst others, as the major factors militating against Nigeria's poverty reduction. According to the report, as many as 4 in 10 Nigerians live below the national poverty line, representing about 85 million people, with many Nigerians, especially in the northern states, lacking education and access to basic infrastructure such as electricity, safe drinking water, and improved sanitation. The report further points out that the available jobs have not been able to translate the hard work of the working Nigerian into wealth, as most workers are engaged in enterprises that are not good enough to take them out of the poverty line, with just 17% of Nigerian workers having jobs that are well-paying. The report also highlights the effect of climate change and conflict aftermaths on Nigeria's poor and vulnerable population, which has been compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to these, the report says government support to the affected households to cushion the effect of the pandemic is not far-reaching, with affected households adopting some methods to cope. And these methods include reducing education and scaling back food consumption, which could have dire consequences in the long run. The report recommends long-term reforms to raise Nigerians out of poverty, which include macroeconomic reforms, policies to boost the productivity of farm and non-farm households, enterprises, and improving access to electricity, water, and sanitation, while bolstering information and communication technologies. It says if implemented, these reforms could help diversify the economy, create productive jobs, and support social protection programs. The report also emphasizes that these reforms are very urgent, even as Nigeria's population keeps increasing. Some economic analysts say that for Nigeria to reduce its poverty level, support and urgent focus needs to be given to the MSMEs to help them grow and metamorphose into economic cluster powerhouses that will be employers of productive labor, which will in turn help pull majority of Nigerians out of the poverty line into prosperity. Now, on the program today, we shall take a critical look at the report and any other possible factors that are inhibiting poverty reduction in Nigeria. What are the national and sub-national governments doing that tend to contribute to the increasing levels of poverty? Is the World Bank report an indictment of the social intervention programs of the federal government? Have they failed to address the fundamentals? Join us as we try to break down the issues right after this time. Thank you so much for staying with us. We're looking at the World Bank Poverty Assessment Report for the year 2022 for Nigeria. And I'm joined in the studio at this time by Mr. Andrew Mamedu. Mr. Mamedu is the Director of Resource Mobilization of Action Aid Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Well, we expect to also join us in a while an economist, Ogbonna Ukuku. He will be joining us in the course of the program. But Andrew, let's begin this way. Now, you must have come across or seen the World Bank report, which was released on Tuesday this week. So it's still fresh, as it were. Now, what do you make of that report in the first instance before we go into the details?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, the report is not so different from where we are coming from. So, what has changed? That's the question. We had a similar report 2 years ago, and then this year. If you are comparing the percentage level, there's no much difference. So, okay, so 2018, if I pick 2018, for instance, the report said about 40% of Nigerians. But this current one is showing that it's 39.19% Nigerians that are below the $1.9 poverty line that we have set as a country. There's no much difference. It shows that there was a little decrease, which in some sense looks positive. However, if you look at the absolute value, because the population as of 2018 was less than 200 million, and the population now, like the report rightly said, the absolute figure we had right now we have about 85 million Nigerians, compared to then when we had about 78 or 79 million Nigerians that were below the poverty line. So nothing has changed. It's just the percentage that has reduced. Rather, a lot of factors has contributed to the increase in the absolute value. The simple one, even if nothing happens, if you compare the GDP growth rate versus the population growth rate. Last year, 2 years ago, 2020, we had a negative GDP growth rate, minus 1 point something GDP growth rate, while our population was growing at 2.556%. So if nothing even happens, everything working normally, it means that the amount of resources, the GDP per capita, the amount of resources that will go to each individual's hand will be less because the GDP is not growing as much as the population. Ordinarily speaking, it means that you are giving birth to more children. We are giving birth to more children than the resources that we are making to take care of the general population. So if nothing happens, it means we will remain in poverty. Poverty would worsen. But like you rightly said, so technically the percentage has reduced from 2018 till now, but absolute figure has also increased. So that means that the number of Nigerians that are living in poverty has gone up. So same, nothing has significantly changed with the policies that we have in place.
For instance, in 2020, the percentage in terms of those living below the poverty line, national poverty line, was 40.1.
Yeah.
In 2021, it rose to 42.8. But now, it has dropped minimally, as it were, to say 40%, to get around figure. But between 2020 and now, COVID seemed to have driven about 5 million more Nigerians into poverty. Whereas in 2020 and 2021, the absolute figures in terms of those who were living below the national poverty line was 80 million. In 2022, it has gone up to 22 million. And that speaks to the increasing population that you talked about earlier on.
Yeah, so yes, there are several factors. So I assure you in the next 3, 6 months, 1 year, 12 months, we'll be talking about the implication of the Ukraine-Russian crisis on our economy. We're already talking about it, but it's going to manifest, it's going to show. So yes, COVID actually dealt a huge blow on the global economy. So it affected, including developed economy, not just Nigeria. So there are several factors that has affected us. However, talking about poverty doesn't, we cannot talk about poverty without mentioning or discussing the issue of inequality. So is it every Nigerian that is feeling the pinch, the bite of, or that felt the bite of COVID? Yes, we did, but not at the same pace, not at the same magnitude. Some people were able to get out of it. So some governments were able to put in social protection measures in place, including Nigerian. But you saw the picture that went around, the videos that went around, where people were breaking into palliative warehouses and all that. So the palliative didn't go around. We did not deal with the COVID as we ought to. So definitely the impact of poverty, the effect of COVID on our poverty level was way, way higher compared to other parts of the world. So it is not just an excuse for us to remain on that, because countries that also went through COVID, they've recovered. If you take the United States, if you take Great Britain, for instance, the economy has started growing. And ours, to be frank, our GDP is already growing. So this is the first time, this is the highest GDP that we have had in the last 7 years, the highest GDP we have had in the last 7 years. So those are positives. But leaders are known based on their responses, what they do in difficult and tough situations. So we should not only talk about issues of COVID or issues of the Russia-Ukraine crisis as a limiting factor for us to deal with this issue. Yes, we had poverty, and it seems that the percentage is getting better, it's improving. But the absolute figure definitely should be a concern to us at the end of the day.
Well, the absolute figures, and here the World Bank report speaks about some of the factors that may have contributed to the growing level of poverty. And it says that they may not be absolute in the sense that they may not be the same across board. That is, there is a spatial distribution of these factors from state to state. And it says, for instance, that states in the northern region of Nigeria are particularly highly impacted in terms of the lack of education, a lack of access to basic infrastructure such as electricity, safe drinking water, and improved sanitation. These are three key areas that the report seems to identify as contributing to the increasing levels of poverty. Now, how huge are these factors in terms of poverty levels and getting people out of poverty, particularly the most vulnerable in society?
Okay, thank you very much, Imoni. So the micro, small, medium, and enterprises clearly could be a pathway, should be a pathway for us, like the reports rightly recommended. And what will these organizations, what would they use to function if there is no power? In the last 2 months, 1 month plus or 2 months, power has been epileptic. We've had the national grid collapse several times, and there are several excuses. So from the last report, it doesn't
seem to have recovered anyway.
We haven't recovered.
Yes.
So we have spent from 1999 to date over 11 trillion on power. We've had several promises. It's a campaign promise. So every person says, "Oh, I'm the right person to deal with power," and they come in, and we do not see the appropriate response in dealing with power. So power is one major factor. Education is another critical factor. Investing in the social sector, particularly education, water and sanitation, those are critical factors. And of course, there are issues of insecurity. And guess what? One of the coping mechanisms for the poor is to cut away education. So once anything happens to, the report also said that, so once anything happens to their source of income, what happens? Some things suffer. The first thing that will suffer is the education of their children will suffer. The next couple of things that could suffer would be, they would want to marry their children early, because you are trying to reduce the burden on the family. So it's easy to give out your daughter, it's easy to give your son out to go and go on for almajiri, beg alms and all that. It's easy to reduce the level of food, the food that the household is exposed to. So clearly, all of these have a long-term impact on the family, on the state. So it's a cyclical effect. If we want to pick 2-3 areas to deal with as a government. We're getting to campaign era again. So what are those 2-3 areas? Deal with these 2-3 areas, and let's, you have the smallholder farmers who account for 80% of what we eat in this country. And they're about 70% of the farmers are smallholder farmers. They account for that. But most of them are not able to be, about 70% of them, of those number, are below the poverty line. So clearly, it shows that if we put enough energy in trying to get these smallholder farmers to produce enough to feed themselves, get out of poverty, and also feed the country, we'll have a long way in getting more positive results in dealing with the issue of poverty.
Okay, let's at this point welcome Mr. Ogbonna Okuku, who's joining us now. He's an economist. Thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Right. So I'm sure that by now you are familiar with, or at least have seen the World Bank assessment of Nigeria's poverty level. Yeah. Well, what in your view are the national and sub-national government, that is the federal and state governments, doing right or wrong that seem to be contributing to the increasing levels of poverty, or at least inhibiting the efforts as reducing poverty generally in Nigeria? Okay,
it would be very nice for us to actually build a foundation around this entire conversation. Let's even start from when you're looking at, improving the lives of people in the society. First thing you have to look at is, are there parameters, surrounding how a society should be? First thing first, you have to look at the ways of life within that particular space, which is the rules that exist within that space. The institutions. What are the institutions? These are teams of people who are designed, with mandates, legal mandates to make sure that these rules are actually implemented. Number 3 thing is, which is most important, is how are the citizens exposed to some of this information? What are the roles of citizenry within that critical mass of an informed citizenry is also very key. Number 4 is that political leadership. Now, having looked at some of these issues, we'll begin to ask ourselves, what is the major denominator? It is actually the critical mass of an informed citizenry. Now, if the citizens don't understand what to expect from the political leadership, these are the things that actually lead to some of these issues. If they don't even know what they have to do, because the irony of the entire issue is most people who show up in the political leadership of every society come from that particular set of people with actually the citizenry. Now, if we must have this conversation and have this conversation where it will lead us to growth, first things first, everybody must know what their role is when it comes to contributing to the growth of an economy. Now, those at the national level and those at the state level must understand these are the things we must do, and the ones at the local level must know we must have our roles. For example, you can't have where the federal government designs a program and then the state government, knowing that if it's in agriculture, for example, the land is domiciled in the state, and then it takes so long for a farmer to even have access to land to get his the crops planted or get his activities functioning. So there has to be a confluence. There has to be a meeting point where the state, the federal government, and the local government must come together and design programs targeted at bringing people out of poverty. See, when it comes to economic development, you must look at 2 basic things: scale and specialization. If you don't scale production, there's no productivity. If you don't get people to get specialized in particular trade or particular thing, it becomes a bit difficult for you to even compete with those out there. If you're producing. In China today, one of the things that's happening in China is because everybody they have sectors, they have areas where people go into, let me give you a very simple example. 64% of the buttons used in the entire world comes from a particular city in China. So what it means is that a state like Kogi State can actually decide, okay, we're going to be producing the entire cassava that is used in this country. So there will be a support from federal government through the Anchor Borrowers Program, and then we know that that's what Kogi State is going to be providing when it comes to the global value chain, when it comes to production. So at the end of the day, you see that there are specialized areas where certain goods and services are gotten from, and then it contributes to that productive cycle within that system, and it helps you grow. So if we continue to walk across everybody's political lines and all of that, we can't go anywhere. My colleague here talked about power. Power is something that when people talk about power, I'm like, do you even understand what it means to get power? When you switch your light and it comes on, do you know what it takes? So the citizenry need to understand, if somebody says as a campaign slogan, I say, I'll give you power. I'll tell the person, please shut up. You can't give me power. You don't have what it takes to give me power. I need to deal with at least 7 different federal government and state organizations for power to come. Starting from generation to distribution. So if I cannot get, if as a citizen, I don't know what it takes to get power, that is why anybody can stand on the podium and tell me, I'll give you power, and I'll listen to that person. So be that as it may, so there's a lot of work that we need to do as a people. There's a lot of work we need to do when it comes to advocacy, making our people understand that these things are not, yes, they are not rocket science, but they are not as easy as they make it look. It is a lot of work, and it's something that we need to all come together to make sure it works.
So Andrew, he's talking about synergy here between the federal government, state government, and local governments in producing, in having productive production, as the World Bank will put it. And here in Nigeria today, we see a situation where a certain political party runs the federal government, and there are other political parties running the subnationals at that level, and even at the local government level. And there doesn't seem to be any synergy in terms of economic policies. There doesn't seem to be any kind of synergy in terms of what the political parties themselves say they want to do for the citizens and all of that. Now, how do we then begin to think of achieving that synergy with the people at the center of it all?
Okay, thank you, Bonia. So I think the first thing is interest. So have we seen synergy in other areas where it concerns the federal and the state? Yes. A good example would be bills that are going to the National Assembly. Take the electoral amendment we just had now. In that case, in some of the clauses within the bill, the executive, both at the federal and the states, were on the same page. Whether it be PDP, APC, AGA, whatever party, they were all on the same page. They want to control power. Interest. But in the same vein, the legislators were on the same page. So no matter the political party. So they were all on the same page. So when it comes to interest, we have our leaders on the same page. So the question is, what is the interest on the issues of development? So if you are asking someone, a poor person, a poor person around, who should become the leader of Nigeria, the first thing that comes to the person's mind is, I want somebody that will get me out of poverty. That's the first thing. However, our leaders are smart enough that they use the divide and rule system. They use that divide and rule system in such a way that we are busy talking about, it should be from this religion. It should be from this part of the country. But not focusing enough on what is the deliverable. How does the actions or inactions of this leader or these leaders, looking at the synergy between the state and the federal government, how does synergy help us to get out of poverty? And this is where the middle class, where all of us come to play. To a large extent, we determine a whole lot what happens, the narrative and all that. So what narrative are we putting out there? Those in the communities, those that have the highest number of votes, it's easy for you to go tell them, sell a product to them, and easy for them to believe it. Like my colleague said, I'll give you power, I'll give you education. But there are critical questions they need to ask. But that is where we come in. We need to provide that level of enlightenment, that level of education. That's it. Our constitution, the federal system that we run, again, comes to play here. It's either we are running a federal system or we are running a unitary system. We are combining it. We need to devolve power to the states and the local government. And also, why would power be on exclusive list? Why? So by the time we devolve power and empower the people at the community level, at the grassroots level, to hold their governors responsible. The feeding bottle federalism that we do, we come here, Abuja, every 22nd, 25th, to share the money, and we go back. That would not encourage productivity. So until that happens, and the federal government's responsibility is that of coordination and not partisan relationship. We are more focused about taking glory, taking interest and all that, and forgetting the people that are living below poverty. These are human beings, for crying out loud. 80 million people. Look at their coping mechanism. And it is increasing crime in the society. They are reducing their meals. They are pulling their children away from education. What does that tell us? It sends a strong message. The society is going to get worse. It's going to be a cyclical approach. So it's going to get worse and come back to hurt us at the end of the day. Yes, it will first start with the middle class. Then at some point, it will get to the upper class. When NSAS broke out, of course, we saw private jets trying to leave the country. A lot of them leaving the country. Because if it gets to that point, nobody will be able to run, and it will affect every one of us. So clearly, the responsibility almost lies on starting from the federal government in coordinating this, and the state government. So we don't care what political party you belong to, whether it's APC or PDP. When it comes to issues of citizens' welfare, why don't we put that aside and focus on getting these people out of poverty? That becomes the interest, and then that becomes what will drive us. And they would not do it on their own. Citizens have to wake up and hold their governments accountable.
Ogbonna, I like to bring a portion of that report to your attention. It says that available jobs have not been able to translate the hard work of the working Nigerian into wealth, as most workers are engaged in enterprises that are not good enough to take them out of poverty line. With just 17% of Nigerian workers having jobs that are well paying.
Now we're looking at the expanding the physical space. Now, if you want to expand the physical space, one of the first things you have to look at is you ask yourself, how do we industrialize a nation? Now, there are things you must consider when you want to industrialize. First things first, you have to look at, one, do you have the market? Two, do you have the manpower, which is where knowledge base comes again. If you don't have properly trained people who can man certain industries, it becomes a bit difficult to even harness those potentials. Number three, do you have a well thought out technology transfer strategy? Because some of the technology we're looking at to even manufacture, some of them come from other climes. They don't come, they are not, we don't have readily made industrial development plan. As a nation, we don't even have what it takes. So let's tell ourselves the truth. Number three, what are the financial engineering strategy that you have? What are the funding mechanisms that you have? As we still speak in Nigeria, in this 21st century, we don't have a venture capital system, which is, all we talk about is, yes, we have the Anchor Borrowers Program, we have development finance institutions, we have the commercial institutions, commercial finance institutions, but the most critical, which is the bootstrappers, as they call them in economic development, where are the venture capitalists? Who are the people who will take the initial risk? They have to be available. They don't exist. So which speaks to the inequality, financial inequality that exists within our system. The rich are so rich and they're not interested because what they do to make money, they are comfortable with. They can live their entire life doing what they do. So they're not interested in new ventures. They're not interested in you going to farm. They're not interested in, so all they do is those who are high up there, who make money from either the oil and gas system or the financial services they're provided, or they are contractors with government. When they make their money, they send their children to school, and when their children actually bring out good ideas, say, are you all right? Please go and get a job in a big organization in Nigeria, because they have the legs to get them there. So it begins to create that gap, and that gap continues to exist in that particular space. So it brings us to where, like you said earlier, the citizens must begin to ask questions. How do we, because everybody has to, we all have to be part of it. We all have to, know what our role is, when it comes to economic development. So our role is to ask questions. Our role also is to pay our taxes. I always say this, until your funds are there, you will not begin to ask questions. It's even biblical. It's biblical. It says where a man's treasure is, that's where his heart is. Until all Nigerians begin to pay tax, no matter matter how poor you are, that is when you begin to ask questions about what is happening to your money. Because we're still living on rents coming from oil, that's why, oh, it is their money, it is oil money, it is Niger Delta money. Now, if every Nigerian, including a housewife, when we all begin to pay tax, that's when it begins to pain you more. It's not just our money, it becomes my money. So that is when, because these are things, if you look at countries like the United Kingdom that actually run their economy not on rent but on taxation, you see how a taxi driver will be asking, what is Gordon Brown doing? What is this person doing? They want to know, what has Tony Blair said? They are interested because their money is involved in it. So I think that role that we all have to play to make sure that we grow this economy is something we need to pay attention to.
Andrew, we need to come down to brass terms now. The one World Bank report, this current World Bank report, how does it reflect on the social intervention programs of government over the years? Because it appears to me, I might be wrong, that the social investment programs have not hit the kind of target, have not impacted the system the way they were designed to impact. Otherwise, we should be seeing a reduction of poverty rather than stagnation or some level of growth from year to year. So is this an indictment of the social investment programs of government? Have they failed? Have they succeeded one way or the other? Every time the president talks about pulling 100 million Nigerians out of poverty, but it appears we are sinking deeper into poverty.
Okay, thank you very much. So, social investment program, like it's been done across the world, targets the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable. So it's a stopgap measure to cushion the effects of poverty on a particular class. And Nigeria over the years has run several social investment programs. The last one, or this current one we are running, is the biggest that we have ever had. So we must, of course, applaud the current administration at the federal level. We started with 500 billion naira for various areas, so including the N-Power, school feeding, homegrown school feeding program, and all of that. So it was, at the first year to second year, it was going very well. And gradually, the funds, the government made a commitment through the vice president and says that we are going to give this amount to every poor Nigerian that does not have a job. But when, of course, when they came in during campaign, when they came in, they reneged on that. But they found a way of saying, okay, we'll give 500 billion to start with. And that started. Second year, third year, it dropped to 400 billion. And currently, how much is it? It's no longer, it's about 100 and something billion in the budget. So clearly, it shows the priority, first of all, that we give to it. Secondly, we do not have an institutionalized framework on how to run the social investment program. To be fair, the World Bank supported in bringing out the lists of those living in poverty that would benefit from the program. And at start, it was going that way. But of course, trust the politicians. As usual, they came out, including members of the National Assembly. And they said, no, we must have our own lists. So the office had to find a compromise to accommodate the list from the National Assembly. These are not people that actually need the program, that need this funding, need this support. So they brought in some other politicians, those that have been supporting them. They say, well, we are the ones that are in the constituents. We know the poor people. We'll be able to provide the list to you. We'll be able to give you. There's no way. And if you don't allow us, we will not approve your budget. That's the whole debate came. And it was approved. And they came in, okay, what would you be doing? Because you need to do something. It's a conditional fund. What would you be doing? Oh, okay, they will do this, they will do that. And that happened. Well, clearly, whenever a social investment program comes, something along the way, again, about politicians' interest, comes and derails it. So the one that we're currently running, social investment program, it was something that started very well. It was cruising, but at some point, it went down. When it was being managed, to be fair and sincere, when it was being managed in the vice president's office, we could tangibly see more results. Yes, we had more resources then. We could tangibly see more results than right now when it has been moved away from that office. So clearly, there is some ups and downs. There are some positives and definitely lots of negatives around it. There are a lot of corruption embedded in it. There are a lot of people that collect the money and don't go and feed for the school feeding, for instance. They don't feed anybody. There are a lot of issues around, of course, around it. If we must deal with the issues of poverty, inequality must be looked at. 5 richest Nigerians that have a combined income of over 30 billion, their income is sufficient enough to deal with issues of extreme poverty in Nigeria. The richest man in Nigeria, if he decides not to work again today, the wealth he has, and he spends $1 million every day from that money, from that his wealth, if he doesn't work again, he's not earning extra income, it will take him 42 years for him to finish the income he has. So we're not against that. But clearly, like Obuna said, there is a huge difference between the have and the have not. Nigerians' Gini coefficient is one of the highest in the world, the difference between the have and the have not. So if we must deal with it, why are some people so rich in a country like Nigeria and others are extremely poor, extremely poor? So how do we deal with that gap? If the richest man in Nigeria again decides to say, oh, the income I'm making every year, the income I'm making from now, I'm going to use it to deal with poverty. Oxfam report says that it will take 2 million Nigerians annually out of poverty if he decides to do that. So our billionaires, why can't the government work with them? I'm sure they've got a good heart. You see them run interventions here and there. Why don't we work with them to deal with the issues of poverty, deal with social protection, and at the end of the day, Nigeria comes better off for it?
So for you, Ogbonna, is it a matter of implementation or the structure of the policies of these social investment programs and the economic policies that the government have put in place? Is it a question, is it a failure of implementation, or in fact it has to do with the fundamental, the structure of these policies?
Okay. No, on a lighter note, please, the richest man in Nigeria should not decide not to work, because if not, we won't have refinery that is coming. He should not decide to. Anyway, on a more serious note now. The social investment program, I think it's been effective, in the sense that, it's been getting to those, the monies are getting there, the trader money and all of that. I mean, like he said, the government have actually done well when it comes to that. But I want to take it from another perspective. You really can't grow an economy with social investment program. I think it's more of a support system for the very poor within the society. So because I mean, these things, people are coming out of school every year, the population is still growing, so I mean, and then the issues that we're faced with, the complexity of the conflicts that we're having, within the some of the regions in Nigeria, the insecurity. So some of these things are still getting people, from, living normal lives to a very, a chaotic life. People are running helter-skelter everywhere. People are being chased out of their homes daily by, bandits and all of that. So these things will keep increasing. So I think it's always been a problem. Okay, because if you look at most of the development partners all the years, they've been here trying to solve problem of cholera, polio. It took us how many years to come out of all that issue? Because, it's usually a support system, but there has to be a homegrown design economic development plan. That's actually what gets countries out of poverty, not social, social or the social investment programs. Because, check all over the world, social investment programs are never a pathway to economic growth. They are usually just a support system to help those who are, vulnerable, to make sure that they stay afloat until you're able to design a well-thought-out program. I say this, I think the real issue is our problem-solving mechanism as a people, generally, Africans generally. I give a very simple example. For example, if you look at how much we spent, even with the development partners, if you look at how much Global Fund, Malaria Consortium have spent on nets and to support malaria, is a humongous amount of money. But I mean, where does malaria come from? Malaria comes from mosquitoes, mosquito bites, and then where does mosquito come from? It comes from dirty environment. So if we spend 10% of the money we spend on trying to cure malaria, and give it to Ministry of Environment to make sure that our environment, we clean up our environment, we don't need to spend that huge amount of money. That's just an example because, I mean, like I said, our problem-solving mechanism, which is based on how we were groomed. We were groomed with a miracle mindset. As children, we're taught, how, David killed the Goliath, without, it was more of a big Goliath that was brought down by a small David, when it's supposed to be how skillful the young boy was, So our attitude towards critical thinking, it's what actually helps us in developing strategies on solving problems. So if we begin to solve problems well, you will see that we'll be able to save more money. We'll be able to solve some of these issues. We'll be able to increase expand our physical space. So some of these things that we are looking at as rocket science become a little bit easier because people are strategically looking at how to solve some of these issues. Industries can work. We can have our road networks. We need to sit down. How do implements get to the farms? How does products come out from the farms? These are, if you take, for example, logistics is a very huge issue in Nigeria that nobody even wants to look at, critically. If you drop, I say this, it's easier for you to move goods from China to the seaport than you to move goods from Ogoloa to Benin Republic. That's your goods from China because it's on, is from the is on the sea, on the high sea. It comes to the port. You are just dealing with those at the port. It comes into the country and then you distribute in the market. But from Ogolua, from Macmillan bus stop to Benin Republic, I'm talking about exports now, supporting the export sector. So that logistic is a big problem. It's a huge issue. You now have to start praying. So how come we can't pay attention to some of this, pay attention to details? How does this work? Who do we need to hold accountable when these things are not working? We're still talking about the single window export program at the port. All the organizations there, what are they doing? Can't we just sit down on the comfort of our homes? I have never seen this before. You want people to pay tax, and it's so difficult. Go to tax office, it's so cumbersome. Can't I just sit down and ask? There should be a software on my system. I can download it from FIRS. How to calculate your tax? Very simple. It shows you do A, click B, click D, and then you pay the money through your bank. Why do I need a tax consultant? Why do I have to have headache for something you need? I have never seen it before. So these are the things we're talking about. Being able to critically look at issues, pay attention to details. How can we solve problems? How can we make life easier for our people? And then it will be better for everybody.
Andrew, the World Bank report made allusion to issues of climate change and conflict aftermaths. And it says that Nigeria's poor and vulnerable people are most impacted by these two factors.
Yeah, thank you very much. So if you look at one of the critical conflict we've had over the years, the farmer headers crisis, is being exhibited as a result of the movements of cattle down from the north to the south. And if you look at the critical area, the Borno, Adamawa, Yobe axis, with the drying up of the Lake Chad. Each year, Lake Chad dries up by particular kilometer, and it's definitely going to have its toll on those livestock. So they will just find a way of surviving. And if they're finding a way of surviving, they would move, and definitely they will get into farms. People are expanding their farms, clearly. And once they get into farms, there will be crises. So there will be, oh, you entered my farm and all that. So that has been the story. So climate change has greatly impacted on the farmer headers crisis. Climate change has greatly impacted on farmers themselves. So you need to then focus more on climate resilient agriculture. So are we having climate resilient seeds, seedlings and all that to give to our farmers to respond to that. So those are the ways other countries respond to it. But while we are dealing with the issue of climate change and ensuring that our environment is green, Abuja is doing a bit well in that. During El-Rufai it was way better, but of course Abuja is still a bit green. But other parts of the country, how do we make sure it's still green and all that? If not, of course, the climate change is just going to keep getting worse. And once it keeps getting worse, people are going to look for greener pasture. People are going to look for ways to survive, and it's going to lead to conflict. So it reminds us of those days when it was the survivor of the fittest. So if I come here, I'm able to conquer whoever I meet there. I take up that piece of land and I start cultivating it. So clearly, if we do not deal with the issue of climate change, it gets to that point where it becomes survival of the fittest. People then come in, take up farms, get their cattle. It's our right of way. So there are whole discussion of, is there right of way or not? It's our right of way. Our animals have right. They must feed. They must move. And of course, that brings crisis. That affects it. It then further increases the number of persons living in poverty. So once a community is attacked, you burn down that community. Hardly have you seen government responding adequately to restore that community back to normal. So if this family was at 0.5 cents in terms of their daily income for a family, and you now do that, they probably drop to 0.2 because government is not going to respond to restore them to that level. But there are several measures to put in place to deal with the climate change on its own and also to deal with conflicts and crises on its own to avoid all of this. Yes.
Maybe I could just add to what he has just said, which brings me to the same issue I've been talking about, the way we perceive issues. Now, the same issue, what we're discussing here, herders, farmers issue, has actually happened in other countries. This is not the first time. It's not new. Mm-hmm. A country like Botswana have had similar issues, but they have turned it to a lifeline. Now, what do I mean? What industries contribute to our GDP is exactly what beef and cattle contribute to the GDP of Botswana. What am I saying? Cow leg is sold for 50 pula in Botswana, which is exactly 750 naira, cow leg. But cow leg here is sold over 4,000 naira for one. And the cow leg I was talking about, the 4 legs. You buy the 4 legs for 50 pula. And if you buy the 4 legs, they'll give you the head, because that's not where they make the money from. The money is actually gotten from export of beef to European countries. Now, what have they done? They've been able to design a program where you use RFID chip on every cow. So every cow has an owner, has a name. Whenever it goes to a veterinary, it is on record. So there is actually a ministry for animal husbandry. So I'm not talking about Europe here, I'm talking about an African country that have actually looked at the lifeline. So instead of us having this argument, so if a cow in Botswana enters somebody's farm, there is no argument, you know the owner. So these things happen. So when a cow goes into the butchery, what happens is that the tax is deducted directly from government, because they know, because that chip that is on that cow shows that that somebody has earned money. So you deduct directly from the person's account. So these things are not rocket science. They are simply things that we can deal with. But it's just that nobody's willing to pay attention to details. Nobody's willing to do the right thing. Everybody's just there sitting thinking these things can just happen on their own. No, things don't just happen. Things are made to happen.
Okay. In 60 seconds, what would be your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. So there has to be both macro and micro level engagement from the government and from the citizens. So for macro level, for instance, so how Nigeria is heavily import dependent. We're heavily import dependent. So let's do some practical things and reduce the things we import. So where do you have so much difference between the official exchange rate and the parallel exchange rate? So that is, and the economy is driven by the black markets. The economy, 70–80%. There are just a few persons that have access to the official rate. So let's deal with that. It's increasing inflation. Inflation 15.something%. So those macro level will help us. And of course, like you said, let's create focus on areas, create small jobs that would create industries, and at the end of the day, help us grow out of this.
Bona.
Yeah, okay, so my parting shots?
Yes.
Okay, I think it's just an opportunity to tell, like you said, we should be doing our own little advocacy, those of us at this level. So we should be able to manage our expectations as the citizens of this nation. Play our role, find out how we should play our role, support the system, and then manage our expectations. Nobody is a magician. All you need to do is understand how it works, and then it'll be easy for you to assess those who can lead you. And then that makes life better for each and every one of us.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Andrew Mamedu, Director, Resource Mobilization, Action Aid Nigeria, joined by Ogbonna Okuku, who is an economist. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. And, of course, we do know that for now, is a lot of politicking going on in Nigeria. As we move towards the 2023 general elections, there will be a lot of promises. There will be a lot of talk in the media about what one person or the other can do. But my guests are saying, look, let's manage our expectations. Let's get more information so that we are not led again by the nose and into deeper poverty. Thank you for investing your time with us. We'll see you again when we bring a fresh edition of the program, People, Politics, and Power.